Our famous speech at the Oxford Union. Did you expect the response that it got?
The speech, no. In fact, I must say that it was astonishing because, one makes speeches and one posts them and one is grateful when they get a few thousand viewers. There was one speech of mine that had gone viral earlier, TED's speech on soft power. That was way back in 2009. And I didn't think I could replicate anything like that. But this was astonishing because within a day or two, it had crossed 3 million views and hits, was being downloaded, being replayed over and over again. Strangers are coming up to me in all sorts of places telling me that they'd watched it. So I was a bit taken aback by that. Still, I didn't think there was a book in it, which my publisher insisted there was. And I said, look, surely everybody knows this already. To which his answer was, no, they don't, because if they did, your speech wouldn't have gone viral. And I guess that made sense, so I agreed to try and have a crack at making a book out of it, and this is where I am.
And how did you go about researching it and learning new stuff? Because like you said, it's things that you would assume people already knew, and you're kind of trying to dig deeper and find more information.
That's right, because in the speech I basically said things I already knew, so I knew broadly what my argument was going to be in the book. I also knew I wasn't going to write a straightforward narrative history, but rather one that took up the issues and addressed the issues and arguments in a comprehensive way. So then I had to look, and for the first time in my writing career, I actually asked a couple of people to help me with research by saying, can you find academic articles, original documents on these subjects? Fortunately, with modern day facilities available, it meant that with 3 people collecting material for me, I had thousands of pages on a Google Drive in practically no time at all. The kind of thing that would have taken me years in the days when I actually did my doctorate, going from library to library and scrolling notes by hand, everything was on my drive, and I could just sit down with my laptop and start looking at what I wanted to look at. You can get entire documents, House of Commons transcripts, books published in the early 19th century and late 19th century. Extraordinary stuff like that, as well as the most recent contemporary scholarship from places like the JSTOR website, which has all the latest history work being done and published in a variety of serious journals. So I just had access to a whole lot of material that I otherwise would not have had time to collect as a busy parliamentarian and politician.
And was there anything that you found out that just completely blew your mind away, that you just had... Yeah, you just discovered that this could not possibly be true?
There's so much, and I don't know where to start, but I'll give you a couple of examples. One was discovering, for example, that in the Elizabethan years and the century after, the English shopkeepers used to have a habit of trying to pass off shoddy British-made goods as made in India, because made in India was the cachet. Muslin, linen, cloth, textiles of any sorts coming from India were considered the best reputation, and of course had the best reputation, were considered the best available in the world. So made in India was a mark of quality at a time when made in England was not. And that was quite striking. Another thing I was startled to discover was how good our steel was. I hadn't realized we had a major steel industry. We'd invented a kind of steel called ukku steel, known in the West as wood steel. And this steel was so good, the Arabs took the technology from us to make the famous Damascus steel. And when the Europeans, the British East India Company, came to India, when they shot Indian soldiers, they would dismount from their horses and steal their swords, because the Indian soldiers' swords were so infinitely superior to anything available in Europe. That was another revelation. Plenty more like that. The fact that our ships were considered the finest ships in the world. We had the finest shipbuilders, we had the best master craftsmen, but also our wood, teak and mahogany lasted much longer than European fir or pine, and so Indian ships lasted 23, 24 years plus, whereas the average European ship lasted only 6 or 7 years. So when the East India Company made inroads and started controlling the ports, initially they started making British ships in India. But then, of course, that threw people out of work in London. Shipwrights and workers and dockyard workers started protesting. And so the British passed laws that made it illegal for ships made in India to ply on the lucrative London route. And that pretty much killed the shipbuilding industry in India. So example after example like that, and there are plenty more of this in the book.
So changing gears now, you've often spoken about how you were a big reader as a child, and even now. Who are some of the books, the writers that have truly inspired you growing up, that you just love going back to over and over again?
Well, I mean, I must say there's just so much to read that one rarely goes back. one has very fond memories of the books that have made the most impression. For the longest time, I used to read more fiction than non. And in the fiction, I had a very eclectic, some would say indiscriminate range of tastes. So I loved P.G. Wodehouse, who was my favorite author, simply for the verve, the style, the plotting, the humor, the classical allusions, and altogether the extraordinary uplift it gave one's mood when reading a Wodehouse story or book. So I read all 95 of P.G. Wodehouse's books before I was 19 years old. And I have to say that was my big regret, because I wish I had had them to accompany me through adulthood as well. But there wasn't time to go back. There were one or two that I did read again in adulthood, but the magic of reading them in my impressionable teen years perhaps stayed with me. But I equally enjoyed the Latin American fabulous magical realists, Garcia Marquez above all, but also Vargas Llosa, Manuel Puig and others. Then I read the East European hyperrealists, people like Milan Kundera, or the American modernist novelists like John Updike or Philip Roth. I was really quite eclectic in my reading, and I read a lot of the Indian writings as they started coming. In fact, since I was already quote-unquote established in America when these writers started getting to be known, I was invited by one publication or the other to review them. And I'm proud to have given some of the first reviews, and I'm pleased to say some of the most positive reviews, to the likes of Arundhati Roy, Vikram Chandra, Manil Suri, all of whom, and later Amitav Ghosh. I didn't review his first couple of books, but his later books. So I enjoy seeing what these wonderful Indian writers are up to, and that's also a source of great joy.
Now, you've been here at the Zee Jaipur Literature Festival quite a few times over the last 10 years. How has it changed over the past decade? And also I wanted to find out, how important is it to have these kind of platforms where people are debating and discussing all kinds of ideas?
It's wonderful. Well, first of all, let me say that the change has been dramatic, because I first came here in January of 2009, I think the second ever JLF festival, and they were telling me, they were marveling at the crowd I attracted, which must have been about 300 people or 400 at most, sitting on the lawn while Shoma Chowdhury interviewed me. And they were marveling, my God, we've never seen so many people, etc. As you know, today, when you get 10,000, that's a crowd. That's what the JLF is capable of attracting, and it probably would be more if they had physical space for more. Instead of just one or two parts of the Diggy Palace have invaded and taken over the entire complex, plus tents and other things being constructed everywhere. It's quite extraordinary how much it has changed, and the numbers are astonishing. And of course, that explains partly how JLF has given birth, as it were, to so many imitators and so many other festivals around the country. Why is this important? Because I think JLF, like all good literary festivals, and certainly as the exemplar here, is both a festival of literature and a festival of ideas. And therefore, having a platform at which people who've thought about these issues, especially as writers, can discuss them intelligently before a knowledgeable audience, and invariably also take some questions from the knowledgeable audience, that I think is hugely important to give people this ferment that ideas generate. Plus, it's a very international festival, perhaps more so than most Indian festivals, and therefore you also get the cross-fertilization that comes from hearing ideas that are being thought of elsewhere in the world. And they in turn benefit from hearing what Indians are talking about here. So all things considered, I would say that we really are in a situation where JLF has become a significant force on the cultural map of India. I'm delighted to be back.
Great. The last thing, so we've got Proust's questionnaire in our Rajasthani turban. So if you pick a little, have a shuffle and pick a question.
When and where were you happiest? Oh my gosh, I don't know. I suppose, strictly speaking, if I was to take a moment rather than a period of my life, the moment was when my twins were born and survived. They were born 8 weeks premature, and there was real fear they wouldn't make it. The happiness came when they went through a few weeks in intensive care, 5 weeks, and came home alive and well and assured of living without any damage, and that was undoubtedly the happiest moment of my life.
Great. Thank you so much.
That was in
for
Singapore,
your time.
since it's
Thank you for your